Well, welcome everyone for the fifth session workshop of our How I Built This series. This time, Colleen Brady is joining us, who is a creator and resident at 100 Days of No Code and a big Webflow user, a fan, even got awarded a few weeks ago at the Webflow conference for the community MVP. So it's an honor to have you here today, Colleen, to show us how you build a membership site with Memberstack and Webflow. Great that you want to introduce me personally, and I know Kat has mentioned this today as well, to Webflow. We are curious. Shay already mentioned you meant a lot for her to introduce her to Webflow earlier. So I'm sure this is going to be a great session. And welcome, and curious about your build.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, I should probably start sharing my screen here. Let me do that.
Yeah, let's set this up.
Okay.
So, and for those who are watching this later, this session is where Colleen first shows us demos shortly what she built, and then will show us around how she did this. You maybe are already familiar with this format from the last sessions. And people who can't join us now, you can always ask your questions afterwards on Slack if you have any questions. And the people who are attending this session, of course, feel free to ask your questions when there's a good moment to ask them. Yeah,
and hopefully I'll be able to keep an eye here on the chat. So hopefully everybody's able to see my screen. Should just see a screen with kind of multiple windows. We're going to be jumping back and forth between a couple different tools. So and I guess I'm not able to. I guess with sharing my screen, I've kind of lost the view of everybody, but I do have the chat up. So if you have a question or need me to stop at all, just let me know. So what I thought I'd start with is we're going to be kind of working with building something that deals with members. So I know a lot of times when one is just getting started building with no code tools, one of the things one wants to do is like build a membership directory and potentially gate some content. And so I hadn't really seen much in the 100 days of no code space on doing that. So that's kind of part of the backstory a little bit here. There's also some other backstory. It was just mentioned about Webflow Conf having taken place a few weeks ago. And one of the things that I did as part of prep for that event is like, hey, I'm a no coder. Of course, if I'm going to go to an event, I've got to have like something that I've created or built or something related to the event. And so what I did is something called PhotoFlow, which was basically this mobile game where people created an account. They were given challenges to do during the conference, and then you uploaded photos to complete those challenges. And so while I'm not going to show that build exactly, I'm going to show elements of what was involved with that so that you can kind of follow along and maybe get some ideas of something that you might want to build. So with that, let's talk a little bit about the tools that are involved with this. So the first one is, of course, Webflow. Second is Memberstack. In Memberstack, there's a version 1.0 and a version 2.0. And so in this case, using Memberstack 2.0, Zapier for connecting some pieces together, Airtable, and there's also some custom code that's behind the scenes. I don't know that today we'll be able to have a chance to get much into that custom code, but we'll just kind of see how things go. And with that, you may be wondering why these particular tools. Well, one, I'm a big Webflow fangirl, so of course, that's going to be part of my base. Also a big Airtable fangirl, so that kind of also ends up being part of the stack. But Webflow has a membership offering in the works that has been announced. And so you may be wondering why I didn't necessarily use that. It didn't quite have all the functionality that I wanted for this particular case. And at that particular point in time, it also, I think, was still in beta at Webflow Conf. If I remember correctly, that got launched actually publicly they've also announced Logic. It had been kind of in beta and has subsequently been made public. So if I were to sit down and redo this now, I might make a little bit of a different tech stack choice. Also, there is a product from FinSuite called Whizzed that was not out and is still not officially out. They've given it to some of their earlier supporters. So that might be another tool that if I were to sit down and be doing this from scratch, I might be reconsidering as part of my stack. And why is that? Is it just because I'm somebody who always wants the latest and greatest? Well, yeah, I'm a no-coder, so of course, that is definitely a possibility. But also, there are some limitations with Memberstack. So when it comes to gating of content, the content is mostly being visible, or is being made visible or invisible. So somebody who potentially has JavaScript turned off, or someone who isn't your average person may be able to go in and get at your content. So it's important to take a look at what is it that you're looking to build, and what is how secure does that data need to be? In which case this particular tech stack may not work for you. Since I was just doing kind of a fun game, I didn't necessarily have huge concerns, and so that was okay for me. And so I can't remember the order that I mentioned the tools. I see a question in the chat. So there was Memberstack was used. Memberstack, Whizzed was maybe the other one.
Yeah, Whizzed. Yeah,
Whizzed is from FinSuite. The other things that I mentioned were things that were either in the works from Webflow or have subsequently been made available from Webflow. So, all right. So with that, let's start building. And as part of sort of putting things together for today, I started out kind of thinking about like rebuilding the photo challenge, but I also started to think a little bit of a situation where maybe I'm a realtor and I've got a punch list. I'm going on site and taking a look at issues with a property, maybe before it gets sold. That has a lot of similarities. So you're kind of going around, needing to track down tasks and needing to track down pictures. So we'll see if we have time to get through to some of those things. So first up is creating a account in Memberstack. And once you log into Memberstack, you're kind of given this nice little screen that gives you this nice little checklist of some steps to go through. I wasn't really checking them off because I thought we might do some of that, build some of that live today. And we are going to need to jump around a little bit between a couple of different tools. I think that's one of the things with no code building. It can make it a little hard to follow a tutorial, but I've tried to make it as not jumping around as much as I possibly could. So with Memberstack, one of the first things that we're going to need to do is install the Memberstack script on our Webflow site. Since we are dealing with custom code, this does mean that with Webflow, you do need to be on a paid plan in order to be using some of the custom code options. We're going to kind of go through the sign-up forms, adding a plan, customizing the plan, and kind of going through a workflow of getting someone on the site. So with that, let's jump into Webflow. So if you're not really familiar with Webflow, I just created this account, or this is an account that I don't use all that often, where we're going to be building in today. And so if we go into the designer, actually I wanted to go to project settings, so I misspoke there. Out of habit, going to click on the designer. But really, the Memberstack code, once you get it from Memberstack. So to get at it, you got your code, you're going to go to settings, install code. You've got this code snippet here. And then in Webflow, you want to, custom code. Basically, you're just going to install it here. Because, and the reason being that most likely because of what you're doing, you're going to want to be evaluating whether or not somebody is a member or not, basically on every page of your site. There could be a use case where that's maybe not the case and you maybe want to put it on an individual page, but for the most part, you're probably going to want this on every page. So by putting it in here under project settings, this code and any other code that you want throughout your site will end up on all pages. So, all right. So that was kind of easy first step, adding in our code. Hopefully that's all making sense with everyone. The next thing to do here is let's take a look at our plans. And before the stream started, I created a free plan, just pretty generic. I didn't really do much with the settings, but there are a couple of things that I know that we're going to want for this particular use case. One is we are going to want to have some gated content. So if I go here under plans and for my free plan here, if I go to gated content, I'm going to want to say that everything starting with members is going to be gated. So we've got that now set up. Hopefully, I thought I added something. Yep. I didn't save it because that was off screen. Okay. Yeah, I've got my windows in slightly different order as trying to get things ready for today. Another thing that we're going to want to do when I try this is we're going to want to set up a couple of redirects. So we're going to, on sign up, not use the default. We're going to want everyone to go to login. Get that saved on login. Once you're logged in, we're going to want to go to the members. Oops. Again. Sign up, login. On login, we are going to want to go to the members dashboard because we want to see the things that they have done. And then on logout, we're going to use default settings. So that should be good. And it's okay. A lot of times I don't necessarily do this just starting out. I'll do it when I'm a little bit further in on the Webflow build. But since we already were kind of in Memberstack, I thought I'd get those settings set now. I also thought in terms of working ahead that we'd add a couple additional fields in Memberstack that we're going to want to use. By default, the member plans, so I've got a test person here. Basically, we're just going to have a member ID and an email address, which can be fine. But for our use cases, I want to be able to address the person by name. Maybe you're ultimately going to want to be able to add someone to an email list. And so you're going to want to be able to say, dear so-and-so. And if you're not capturing and storing the first name and last name, that's going to be a little bit harder to do. Also, because we're going to be talking with a couple of different tools and moving data around, it's also going to be good for us to know ultimately the Webflow ID of a person, an Airtable ID, because each record in Airtable has an ID, and then the slug for our person. And this will get a little bit more clear once we get a little bit further along. But why don't this, I'll just show you how to create the fields so that they're ready to go when we need them. So it's very simple. We're just going in and saying first name. And we're going to add a last name. Add our Webflow ID. And we're going to add our Airtable ID. And we're going to add our Webflow slug. Okay, and we'll see that all those were saved successfully. Okay, so we've now kind of given a few additional parameters to our plans, and you can add a bunch of other things too, depending upon what kind of membership site you're building. You know, maybe you want to capture birthday or something else. So, okay. So let's start diving into Webflow just a little bit more. So one of the things that I did just for today's call, just to kind of get things going, was Memberstack has a number of templates that are available that one can use, as well as not necessarily full templates and sites. They also have a lot of just pieces, components that you can build with as part of building with, like, kind of thinking about building with Legos. So I decided to choose this entertainment dashboard one for our purposes. So if we go in, that's Airtable. So here we go. So this kind of looks a lot like that screenshot that I just showed you a moment ago. And because I have too many windows open, I need to request design control over here so that I can design. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to work on our sign up form. And so because I'm using a template, I've already got the guts of a form. Now, if you are deciding to do this yourself and using one of Memberstack's forms, one thing that you're going to need to take a look at is on the form container, they're going to have your plan ID listed. And so since you are creating a plan under your account, you're going to have a different ID. So make sure you change that. And I think I did that before today's call. So, all right. So on these forms, the way that data is getting moved around is that it gets tagged. And so if you start to kind of come down and just click on each of these items, and I probably should have asked everyone who all has, like, should I have given, do people need an orientation within Webflow? I just kind of I maybe assumed more than I should have here. But hopefully, depending upon what, okay. Yeah.
I think you're good.
Okay.
You're doing good.
Okay. So yeah, I'm just trying to think of how to compare this, like, to a bubble and some other tools, but basically basically a website is blocks within blocks within blocks. And so what we're seeing here is basically the document hierarchy. And so this outer div of our form container is going to have some attributes. This data MS form, that is related, that MS is standing for Memberstack. And so this is basically telling, when as Memberstack and Webflow talk to one another, that this is the sign up form. And so you're going to be handling this data as if it was part of sign up. And as part of this, we are going to be adding the person to this free plan, which is on one of these tabs over here, which I have now lost, from Memberstack plans. Yeah, this here. So when you're looking at your plan, this is your data, and this is the attribute that you have that you put on the form. And then your email field is obviously also going to have, come on, stay stuck. Is also going to have this MS member attribute for email. Password also is going to have an attribute. And since we have decided that we're going to do first name and last name, let's add those to our form, so you can see how that works. So I'm just going to kind of mimic the style classing and naming that they're using here. This isn't necessarily my style. If you're new to Webflow, one of the things I would highly recommend is learning how to name your classes. The team over at FinSuite has released something called Client First, which can be really helpful. It can be a little bit overwhelming at first. But something that you just pick away at. First name. And so we are not going to have this be an email field. We're going to have this be a plain text. Say we're going to maybe have our placeholder content be Howard, and we're going to say required. And we are going to change this data MS membership member attribute to be first name. Because that was what we had done just a few moments ago when we were adding these values into Memberstack. All right. And I'm going to move this up because normally we kind of do maybe first name before email or password. And I'm going to skip last name for the moment. All right, so we kind of have our basic form, our basic sign up form going. And I am going to publish this. Very important as you're going along to be publishing your changes and updates and such, because, just like when you're working with Zapier sometimes and you're trying to work on a Zap and connecting different pieces together and you need to refresh fields and stuff, even though this is on the page, if you haven't actually published it, Memberstack isn't going to know about it yet. But by having now published this page, Memberstack is going to start to know about this field. So I'm going to we've published the page. We're going to take a look at it. And what did I just do? This is our sign up form. And I'm going to say, let's say Jane. And if you don't know this trick, if you use Gmail, one way to have a bunch of test accounts for things is to do the plus, and then whatever word you'd like to do. And I'm going to sign up. Or actually, before we do that, let's take a look at our numbers. So we currently just have that test one number, but now we are going to, oh shoot, because I haven't done the logout functionality. Okay, always with demos, always something goes fun and wrong on the fly.
Yeah, that's the rule. That's the rule of thumb.
That is the rule, yes. So I had thought I had wanted to do a little bit of building to kind of show how some things were done, but not necessarily do everything. So let's just delete this guy since we haven't done any of the login, logout functionality. And we need to have this be. Okay. Let's try this again. All right, so, and we're going to just make sure that we don't have any people over there. And so we don't. So we've got Jane, and we're going to do. We're going to sign up. And as part of signing up, I then get redirected to the login page where I can then go and log in. Memberstack does have the ability to have people auto log in as soon as they sign up. I've elected not to do that because I want some automations to run in the background first, and I wanted to kind of buy them some time to kind of start moving some data around and such. But if we look over here, hey, we've got our we've created our account. So hopefully, I'm sorry, I'm not able to see faces, but or maybe I am. Am I able to see?
You're good.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Pablo. Thank you. That's helpful to have you as a co-pilot here. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, you can make your forms a lot more complicated, less complicated, really depends upon what you want to do. So why don't we jump ahead a little bit now that we've kind of got that concept of at least how to set up a form. The other forms are going to be kind of similar types of things within Memberstack where you're adding attributes and such and so forth. So, all right. So we've kind of done that. We've done that. done that. Done that. So let's talk a little bit about kind of our data collections within Webflow. Since not everyone is necessarily familiar with Webflow, I have really kind of enjoyed working with collections, which is the data structure that Webflow uses. I previously had been on WordPress, so tended to have to use advanced custom fields anytime that I wanted to work with data. And so coming over, not having to install advanced custom fields, basically being able to create any kind of data structure that I wanted at the click of a button was really, really nice. And so as you can see here, if I wanted to add additional fields, there's really kind of a whole host of things that I can add. And I can also, this reference means that I can reference another collection, and multi-reference is kind of even a souped up version of the reference functionality, which can come in handy with doing many-to-many relationships. So, okay, so this is my old test one person that I had done earlier, but let's kind of now go through a workflow of if I wanted to have my member data from get captured on the site and going into Memberstack. Let's say I also want to have it on the website, and there may be a number of reasons why I want that data available, like for example, listing directory listing. So that is where we're going to jump into our good friend Zapier. And let's figure out which window we want here. Okay, so you want this first one here. I've already set up a few things just as part of saving time. But we've got a typical, hey, I have a new member in Memberstack, you know, that I have, that is my trigger. My event is a new member. I'm going to choose my account, and then I can test the trigger. One gotcha that gets me every time, and maybe some of you can relate to this, is I, as a no-coder, don't always read, like to click buttons. And so when you are, when you are setting things, yep, okay, not just me. Great. So I was going to
say, I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay. All right. Great to hear that, Lee. Thanks for chiming in. Okay. So when you are setting up your connecting Zapier with Memberstack, there's this little pop-up. You are supposed to enter your secret key. I always do the public key. I don't know why. So that is usually 10 or 15 minutes of me banging my head against the wall. So don't make that mistake. All right. Oops, I did not mean to add a new step. So we're going to delete that step. Really, yes. Okay, so I have a new member in Memberstack. That's my trigger. I'm a little anal, I guess, in that I do not like to use as part of my my URLs and such something that could potentially tie back to another tool in some way. If somebody knows what they're doing, just try to make things, I just personally like to try and make things a little bit more obscure. I know a lot of people basically just suggest using as part of a slug or something, like you could use the Memberstack ID, or you could use the person's name or a number of other things. I tend to basically put in a step within Zapier that just basically is sort of, hey, randomly create a number, and then I start to use that as my ID. I then send my data.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's cool. I just want to ask, could you use like a formula record ID on our table to emulate that step?
You could. You certainly could. So it really kind of depends upon your use case and just how, whatever you're wishing to be. So like Airtable record IDs tend to start like with an REC underscore, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, maybe you would strip off the REC to make it not as obvious. But yeah, you could do really kind of any formula that you wanted to do, and you don't even necessarily have to do it. I do it partly for just a little bit of additional obscurity, partly because it's just the first time I wanted to figure this out. It was fun, and so now I just tend to do that.
That's what matters.
Yes, and it works. So, all right. So I then am creating a record in Airtable. And you may or may not want to do this. There's a number of reasons that you might want to create a record in Airtable. Memberstack has a lot of capabilities for like working with your members, but there may be advanced things that you're going to want to do that you can't necessarily do in Memberstack. And so being able to have that content in Airtable could be really useful to you. So let me think of a good, of course, now on the fly, I'm not thinking of a great example. One of the things that I did as part of the photo flow challenge was by having my content also in Airtable. That helped me with creating my leaderboard of who was on top and who was on bottom. I could have done some of that stuff in Webflow, but it would have been a lot more coding, and it was just a lot easier to just basically dump everything into Airtable and have some views of here was the most, of this or most of that. So again, going to depend upon what it is that you're building, whether or not you want to create a record in Airtable. So, pretty straightforward with connecting Memberstack with Airtable. Basically your base, your table. When I set this up earlier, I didn't necessarily have first name. So now we've got a first name. So let's just test this trigger. So we have this pulled in. And so we now have a first name field. So I could now update this automation. Basically I'm going to continue to use like the email address that came through. I always on my automations like to say, hey, what Zap is something. There's my Webflow slug. And I can now enter in my first name field. So there's that. Continue. I'm going to retest that action so you can start to see where we're sending data through. So we should now have a record in Airtable. So here's our person Jane that just got added just a moment ago. And so you can see, there's our history that says that was just now created. And oops, and I made a mistake. I put her name instead of the first name field. I put it in the name field. So error on my part, but I think we can live with it for today's purposes. And then then the next thing to be able to create my live item in Webflow, there's a couple different options when you're creating an item in Webflow. Live is if you want it to actually be live right away. And so that's what I'm doing in this case. So if we take a look here at our people, we just had just the one person, and I just kind of put in gobbledygook earlier just to have something. But if we go into our Zap now and change so that we've got like our first name. Because that wasn't in the plan. So that wasn't on the form, that wasn't in the plan. And so that wasn't getting sent through earlier. And so if we test our action, that should have gone through. One thing when you are starting to work with Webflow collections is that the page doesn't necessarily refresh with new data. So you will need to come in here and refresh. And so why did you not refresh? Oh, because I've been testing, because I've been pressing the update record in Airtable and not the live item in Webflow. That would be why it's not appearing in Webflow. So user error on my part. People first name. Okay, so let's fix that. Retest action. Okay, and as I said, we see that we now have 2 people, and here is our person that we just added, and we have our first name fields. And I, in my rush of being on a live screen, forgot to change that name field, but yeah, so that for another day. Updating our record in Airtable. I think we did this. Yeah, people name. So let's do our first name here. Continue retest action, and if we pull that up, you'll see that that just updated because it was looking for that particular Airtable ID, so it just updated that record. So we fixed that issue. And then what I always like to do is I like to always finish round tripping my data. So now that I've got my data in Memberstack, Webflow, and Airtable, I like to update Memberstack to have to know that the unique IDs for each person in those other systems. So we can set that.
So you kind of add like an identifier on Memberstack?
Right. So one of the things that happened, I think, before you jumped on the call was in Memberstack on my member plan.
Yeah.
I added some additional fields. Free gated content. Shoot, where are my members?
So you can reference the record. Yeah.
Right. So Airtable ID and slug. So so that's just then a matter of member, login, redirect, last name. So we've got the first name now. Webflow slug, and this is where I can do like the Airtable ID. Not Airtable ID. And so now if I open up Jane, we now have this Webflow ID that just got passed in. And then I always like to just double make sure that I did pass in the right ID. Since I'm on the stream with eyes watching, I may have chosen the collection ID instead of the member ID because they do look alike in Zapier often. So that's 4D5. And yeah, it looks like I chose the right one. So that's kind of round tripping of data. That was quite a bit. Are there questions on what I've gone through thus far? I don't know that I'm going to be able to do a whole lot more. I kind of had tested some of my timing, and I guess I may have misjudged how long it was going to take me to go through some of this.
It's okay. That always happens. It happens, with client calls. It can happen in live demos. So it doesn't matter. But thanks, and thanks for sharing your process. And I'm curious, with the upcoming. Well, we don't know when it's coming, but with the launch of the logic and the signups from Webflow and opening that to the public, how will that make this process way easier? Like how will that change? You wouldn't need to use Memberstack, right?
Potentially not. Potentially, you may not need to use Memberstack. But I think some of it can really depend upon some of your use cases. So Logic is in beta, or Logic is now still in beta, but now it's more open to the public. Before it hadn't really been, you had to kind of get approved to be on the list. And there are certain things that you're able to do with logic, with forms and stuff like that, but I don't think it's quite there yet for certain use cases. So it's taking a look at, what are your use cases, and are your fields supported or not? And then also, the volume of data that you have, kind of pricing, what does that necessarily mean? I don't know. Webflow recently adjusted some of their pricing. I still have a question mark of like, with some of these new features, are there potentially additional costs, or is it baked in, or whatnot? So I think there's a lot that's still that's a long way of me saying it. I think there's a lot in flux, and you gotta kind of see what works potentially for you.
Yeah.
So did I give you enough to kind of grasp on and maybe answer that question for yourself?
Yeah. So I haven't used. I mean, I've played with Webflow a while ago, and it's changed a lot. And my tool then became like, my main tool is Bubble. So it's different how I think about the data structures and the logic, which we call like are the workflows, right? But it's interesting how different tools in space in general are trying to, make up all of those things that they weren't focused at the first time, because Webflow was mostly focused on having world-class design, right? Being a world-class design platform, and then kind of the logic and the database and the backend wasn't very powerful at that time. But now it's, it seems like they're catching up, basically.
Yeah, there was a lot that was announced at
the conference,
at the conference. So like, if you're watching this 3 months or 6 months from now, I might not be using this at all. Some of it is, what are the tools that are available at the time. So when I first did the photo flow, several things were not out yet. So if they had been, I might have gone a different route. But just having some basic knowledge of how Memberstack works is also, I think, valuable for a lot of use cases. So
and still Memberstack, it's like it can be integrated not only with Webflow, like with different website builders. And I still think that, for instance, if you're trying to gate certain like pages of your site, or have a specific experience for different user groups, it's definitely a good option to explore, right?
Right, 100%. Yep. And kind of with some of that, maybe another thing to kind of touch on here, in terms of like gating content. One of the things that we didn't really get into, but maybe we can just kind of talk about theoretically on a high level, is earlier on when we were dealing with our forms with Webflow, we talked a little bit about how we needed to, like on our first name, we needed to put an attribute on it so that, Memberstack knows, hey, this value here belongs in this value in Memberstack.
Yeah, like a map.
So there's
fields.
Right. So there's also sort of a similar thing to do when it comes time to like dealing with your high level navigation bars. So like your header bar. So you don't always, you want your links to be dynamic based on if the user is logged in or logged out. So if somebody is not logged in, you don't want the log out button to appear. If they're, and then, and vice versa. So when you're working on your nav bar, you will put these attributes on of, hey, if the person is not, that's what the parenthesis, or not the parenthesis, the exclamation mark is saying, bang, if not a member. So if the person, so on the, on the link, I'm going to add this attribute. And if they're not a member, the sign up link will appear. Similarly for login, if they're not a member, display the login. This was for my photo board photo flow site that I talked about at the beginning. So if somebody was trying to go to this particular, to go to the leaderboard page, which is only for members, you know, I put this attribute on it so that it would, that way I wasn't having to do a bunch of different navs. I could have just one nav with different situations, and then the log out.
Yeah, I think that's what Lee is asking. This is kind of the conditionals, like how we handle conditional visibility of elements on Webflow.
Kind of with Bubble. I think conditionals in Bubble is maybe more powerful. So maybe not as, I don't think this is quite as robust as what's possible with Bubble. Because you're basically kind of just putting these attributes on that other code is kind of looking at, whereas within Bubble, I feel like you're able to, anyway, I just feel like you can do more. So
yeah, but it is a bit similar, I think, at least in terms of what content it is possible to show to the user, right? And yes, with Bubble, you can pass different variables to a condition, but yeah, it's the same purpose, I guess. I mean, I guess each platform has its own way of doing things if it supports, you know, a particular feature. So and then I guess the other thing that I did for the photo flow board that we're not really necessarily going to have time to get into, but I thought I would just mention, because it's something that I really struggled with when I was working on it. And I didn't have a good way to, when someone logged in, I wanted them to go to the dashboard with their content only. And what I ended up finding the solution needing to be was putting some custom code in on a page that was a redirect. And so after the person would log in, they'd hit the redirect page, and then the redirect page would then log them to their personal page that tapped into some of Webflow's functionality in a nutshell. So you are with that code, you are basically passing the like logging in the user and to make sure that the user only sees their own data, right?
Right. Now there are some ways that can be gamed and whatnot. So it's not 100% pure gating. So, you know, if you have highly confidential information, you know, this may not be the solution for you. That may be where, this may not be the solution for you. But for a lot of use cases, this like for my game, I didn't necessarily need the most, you know, robust of systems because I wasn't necessarily capturing a lot of personal info. So, but okay. Are there, cool. I know I guess as I was kind of going through this, I was kind of like, oh, I maybe didn't set up this part or this part. So, you know, are there, with the questions, there time at the remaining?
No, it's fine. It's fine. Don't worry. I think sometimes we just overthink stuff, and I think we still learn good things. So yeah, Lee has a question, and then Shay, please.
Yeah, I was going to say that Shay, I saw Shay put her hand up. Yeah, I'm just interested more as well about your building process, Colleen, because really interesting how you put all these different things together, and you mentioned how, you know, you like to try one thing and you might go to another solution, you know, further down the line. When you're building in Webflow, do you sometimes build the pages in Scratch, or do you like to use the templates, or do you do a bit of both? The reason I'm asking is that, you know, Bubble's recently brought out components and there's Bubble frameworks, but before that, everything you had to do in Bubble was from scratch. And I'm just interested in, you know, how frameworks can kind of get us into building a bit faster. And how you use that, how you do that, and what's your process in Webflow when you're building?
Yeah, sure, certainly. So I do wish that when I had started building with Webflow, that there were more frameworks and components and such out. And so I tended to start with a blank page, and I'm not necessarily a designer, so that's not necessarily a good thing. But I ended up finding a couple years back, someone who now works at Webflow, Mackenzie Child, had created this kit called Hatch that was just like working with Legos. So are you familiar with that? Yeah. And that just was a huge door opening for me. I historically haven't necessarily liked going with a template. A lot of, some templates are paid, and then, what do I do with it? And I got to learn this designer's way of doing things, and just some friction there. However, in the Webflow space, there's been some changes recently, and a couple of these changes actually came out at Webflow conference. One is Webflow used to have something called symbols, so repeatable content. So like your header or your nav bar, right? You're able to, and so those are now, so those are now components. Now the general Webflow users are able to create components and more easily and readily share them. And they now have style libraries, which they didn't have before. Yeah. So, I like, go ahead. Sorry,
Caroline. Yeah. And I think that's where Bubble's starting to head as well. It's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I think find a framework that works for you. So I mentioned and I don't know that this would necessarily translate over into Bubble in terms of like thinking, but FinSuite has provided a lot of documentation about how they think about things, about how they use containers and such. So while you wouldn't be able to pull any of their templates over, their thought process might work for you, or because I feel like I find like that's one of the so I would say find a frame. Yeah. Okay.
I mean that's what's interest to me, is to help other builders build a bit faster, because I think that especially with Bubble, the off-putting thing has been the blank canvas that you look at, and it was interesting to watch you as you went and you picked a template and you were able to quickly, get your login screen up, and that was really, really cool. And it just making me think about how to use that in Bubble for helping other people who are coming into it. It's really cool.
Yeah, I would say see what a framework, I think. So one of the things that I like about frameworks, if you can find a framework that works for you, is that when you jump from project to project to project, your naming and your styles. And to me, that's like the icing.
You're not reinventing the wheel every time. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Shay?
All right, I was just going to say thank you for doing this. To see, you've seen me write messages constantly of how to do something in Webflow, and then have to do a video because what I said don't make no lick of sense. But to see how you tackle it, that's helpful, because I don't tackle it that way. But that doesn't mean that I can't go, oh, well, she did do this, so maybe I could try to convert that in the way that my brain would think about it, because that's always my problem with things. But so I thank you for this presentation.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that that's helpful. I think, I think for better or worse, I think one of the challenges with no code is that we are having to jump back and forth between different tools. Like, hey, you can start the Zap, but you don't have all these other pieces ready, or so. So I think sometimes that's kind of the hard part, because it makes it hard to see the big picture. So I would just say, be willing to. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. No. That's good. That's good. So, all right.
Yeah. Thanks.
Sure.
Well,
glad to do it.
Yeah. No. Thanks for sharing your build with us, your process and your experience, and also these things that are unexpected and that always happen during demos. So that's part of the vibe of this community as well. So I wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to join this session. Obviously, Colleen is a goat in Webflow, and she's got some great YouTube videos. I think I saw one that you did, like an event planning with with Airtable and Zapier. So that's also a great resource if you're kind of to learn more about her thinking process. And well, to wrap this up, next week we are joined by Tolga, who's going to show us how to automate document generation using a tool called Portent, which is a very interesting tool that it's becoming more popular in space. So thanks everyone. If you could maybe turn up on your cameras to take a quick screenshot, that would be great. And if not, well, I'll just take it anyway. But it's been great to be here with you. Okay, I'm going to take the screenshot in 3, 2, 1. Yep. Awesome. Right, guys. Thank you, and we'll have a great evening.
Thanks, Colleen.
Morning.
Thank you, Colleen.
No, thanks for
Have
coming.
a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Bye all.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thanks.